Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning. Hello, hello. All right. Good to see you online. And I imagine perhaps we'll have a handful more, but hope welcome to those on YouTube as well. And the long awaited, at least for me, I've been waiting for a bit, I guess, to talk about matters of the afterlife, or at least ideas thereof. I should mention a couple of bits of housekeeping. Number one, um, the next couple of weeks, at the very least, I'll be talking about the holiday of Passover. I figure it's going to take at least a couple sessions to go through Passover, at the very least, one to talk about Seder, and the options for Seders, and then another one to talk about how you deal with keeping kosher for Passover. It might extend to a third session. We'll see. Passover is a big topic, and even if we run out of things to say. Two classes in, we can talk about some of the minor holidays that follow, noting Yom HaShoah and Yom HaAtzmaut and other things like that. So we'll have plenty to talk about with the rest of our sessions in March. So plenty to talk about there. Um, all right. So the afterlife. I One of my favorite things, one of my favorite pieces of media about the afterlife is the from the Monty Python movie, The Meaning of Life, in which they're entering heaven, and it's like a big dinner party, and someone walks up to the new entrance and says, "Would you care for an afterlife mint?" That's not exactly how things are in Judaism, but certainly a few. I like to begin kind of on a light note. Um, Here is, first of all, an important thing to keep in mind when we talk about any of this, which is there is no unified opinion about what happens after life on this earth. There is no unified opinion. There are theories and ideas that are more accepted than others, but it is far from unanimous. We'll be talking about ways that Jewish views of the afterlife are different than those of other religions, certainly, and some ways in which we have things in common. But it's just essential that we keep in mind that there's no official position. There's no point where someone says, "Oh, here's what happens," and and so it was. Nothing of that sort. You have to look at views of the afterlife in Judaism on a progression. So we got to start with the Hebrew Bible. Um, for the most part, and there are some exceptions, but for the most part, the idea of an afterlife in the Hebrew Bible was rather limited. Some of the dominant ideas the um, came from the what are known as some of the wisdom books like Job, Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, where they very much forwarded the idea of there is nothing after we die. This is this is what it is. This is what we know. That's all. The There are a couple of exceptions to this. Um, One thing you may encounter is a reference to a place called Sheol, usually spelled Sheol. What is Sheol? It is not what we often understand, or what when we talk about the idea of hell. And by the way, when we think of what hell is, obviously there are broad definitions, but overall, when we're speaking of hell, we are borrowing a lot of ideas from Christianity. Understandably, you know, Christian ideas are very much a part of, they're a big part of American culture, right? I mean, when we picture hell, we're picturing things like, you know, uh, a guy with horns and a pitchfork and flames all around. Um, so that's um, so that's essentially what we tend to think of. Sheol is probably a lot closer to the idea of Hades. Hades from Greek mythology is essentially an underworld in which people essentially go and sleep, sort of a dark place in the other world, but there's no sense of torture or misery. It's just you're done, world, you sleep. There are a couple of notions, a couple of sections that there are a couple of points where we may have a bit of a different idea here and there. One of those is found in the uh, first book of Samuel. Samuel had died midway through the first book. I'm sure he was bummed out that he didn't get to see the rest of the book get written. But he dies in the middle of the first book of Samuel. And King Saul, who was about to be usurped in power and popularity, or if he hadn't already, by the eventual King David, he's looking to Samuel, who is really his chief sort of prophetic guide, to try to figure out what Saul needed to do to please God. So Saul decides to go to essentially a necromancer to try to conjure up the spirit of Samuel. Now, necromancy or anything of the sort is outlawed by the Torah. So in the story, this necromancer says, I'm not supposed to be working with Israelites. I mean, this is against the rules. And Saul is trying to disguise his identity, and he's like, no, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. And so, woman says, okay. She conjures up the spirit of Samuel. Samuel's spirit or something of Samuel, it's not entirely clear, appears and essentially says, I'm paraphrasing, of course, who woke me up? Why am I awake? What's going on? And Saul says, great. Okay, Samuel, what do I need to do to please God? What can I do to win God's favor? And Samuel says, I already told you, it's too late. He's chosen David over you. You dolt. I'm going back to bed. Again, I'm paraphrasing. That is essentially what Samuel tells Saul, and Samuel then goes back to bed, goes back into whatever it is he was in. So that's a story from the Hebrew Bible that does feel a bit different than other ideas. The idea that you could be conjured up. There's also a couple of points in the Hebrew Bible in which it speaks of someone who his life ends on earth, but he walks with God. You find this at one point early in the book of Genesis, and I believe Enoch, I think, is the one who is supposedly walked with God in heaven or something along those lines. But more prominently, you have it with Elijah the prophet. Elijah the prophet doesn't really have a death per se. It happens in the second book of Kings that a chariot comes down from the sky, picks up Elijah, and gives him, an Uber ride up and back into the sky. So there's no official death of Elijah. And by the way, that becomes instructive for ideas of the afterlife that will follow. So you have a couple of those points, but for the most part, that's it. That's really all the indication we have. Now, the ideas of the afterlife are, as you might imagine, very much tied in to the idea of the what we call the Mashiach or the Messiah. And that needs its own explanation. What is a Messiah? What is a Mashiach? Well, if you look in, for instance, the books of Samuel, a Mashiach, to be the Mashiach means to be the one who is ordained, the one who has been ordained by God to be the king. You first see this with Saul, the first king of Israel. Saul is ordained Mashiach. David is ordained Mashiach. Okay. A very important thing happens at the peak of David's power and influence. I've probably talked about this numerous times, but the significance of this cannot be underestimated. In the second book of Samuel, chapter 7, David is musing to the prophet Nathan, I have this great palace here in Jerusalem, but, I brought the ark, and the ark is still sitting in a tent. I need to build a house for the ark. Essentially, he wanted to build a temple. And then God comes to Nathan and says, "No, no, 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 no. David, I can't have David build a house. His son Solomon will build a house." However, David gets this reward. The kingship of Israel will never leave David's house. In other words, David's descendants will always rule over Israel. Okay. So, indeed, Solomon succeeds David, as I'm talking about now in my blog. Solomon succeeds David, and this is a spoiler for what's going to happen a few chapters from now, from where I am on the blog. Um, Solomon, at the end of his life, falls out of favor with God because Solomon allows some of his many wives to bring in idols into the temple. God's not happy with this. And God says, okay, here's what's going to happen. Yes, I made this promise to David, but I'm going to split the kingdom up. And I'm going to give the much bigger kingdom to somebody else. The smaller part of the kingdom, which includes Jerusalem, that will go to one of Solomon's sons. So for the next several hundred years, there was a divided kingdom. There was Israel, the larger one up north, and then the smaller one, Judah, which includes Jerusalem. Now, the king of Israel totally depends. It's outside of David's family. The kings of Judah are indeed descendants of David. That does maintain for a few hundred years until 586 before the Common Era. The kingdom of Israel had already been conquered by the Assyrians more than 100 years before. In 586 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians destroy the first temple and conquer the kingdom of Judah, sending those in Judah into exile into Babylonia. God's promise has been broken. What is it due to think? Well, if you're a prophet of that time, you start to play with the message. And the message becomes, okay, yeah, God made that promise, and God's not going to break the promise. It's just that God didn't specify when the promise would start. Meaning, a king or a descendant of David will always be king of Israel. Just, I guess it hasn't started yet. They pivoted. And by the way, I say this not to be negative. it, it's understandable. They were trying to keep Judaism going at a time where it would have been very easy for people to just pack it in. And for the most part, it worked. The idea that one day a member of David's family, a Mashiach, right, an ordained person by God, will one day become king of Israel. That's how we have that. That's how we got this idea that there will be a Messiah that has yet to come. That Messiah must be a descendant of David. So that promise that God makes to David, even though it expires after a few hundred years, the idea is that, oh, well, it is renewable under the right circumstances. And for many centuries, ever since, there have been numerous times on which people would speak of being descendant of David, and on some occasions, a movement formed around such a person, and there was a movement to declare such a person a Messiah. By far the most famous of whom was Jesus of Nazareth.
Wait,
so you see this, yeah.
did he claim to be the Messiah? That's not my impression, but
Um,
I don't know.
well, I mean, at the very least, and I don't know. I haven't read. I'm not enough of an authority. I'm not an authority at all on the Christian Bible. But whether he said it or whether others said it about him, it was certainly a movement formed around the idea, at the very least.
I somehow understood that started about 100 years after he died, that it didn't actually start while he was still alive. but I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know.
That is my sense of it as well. I hesitate to declare more than that, just not being an
Yeah,
authority
I don't
on
know.
it.
Right.
But yeah. So yeah, so the idea of this promise has major implications, not only to Judaism but to Christianity. So, but setting aside the foundations of Christianity, the idea of
Rabbi, your screen is frozen if you can hear that.
Hello, you're frozen.
Yeah, I don't know if he can hear that or not. He's in his car.
Yes, clearly. I don't know. I sent a message on the chat. It's been a little
It's been
little
sketchy anyhow.
it's
This
been, yeah,
he's
sketchy
yeah.
is the word. I was gonna say jerky, but I didn't really mean jerky, a little sketchy, yeah. A little out of sync.
Well, hopefully he'll make
That's
it
the
back.
Is that the Levine Center behind you?
Yeah.
I love
Does
it.
anyone have his phone number? Maybe somebody can call him.
Oh,
Yeah, I do
I
actually. But,
do. I think I may. Yeah,
um,
I know I do.
Yeah, that might be quicker.
he may wait.
Caitlin said she texted.
I tech. Well, yeah, I
I
sent him
have
a.
it. 843-696-5187. Should I call him?
Yeah, why don't, yeah, it
All right.
could be more effective than texting.
He disappeared now.
Oh, here he is, or was. Yep.
Hello, hello. Sorry about
All
that.
right,
No,
there we
it goes
go.
straight to voicemail. Okay.
My
We just
so
tried to
I was
call you.
told. Thank you. Sorry about that. My phone was getting too hot. Was what I was being told.
Ah,
My phone was getting too hot, so I apologize for that. Thank
That's
you for your
okay.
patience.
That was me when we had our meeting last week.
There you go. There you
Yeah,
go. Thank you for your patience, guys. I'm sorry
Friday
about
night
that.
it happened too.
I'm glad you're back.
I turned on my car engine, so I should be under a more regular temperature in bed. So thank you. Sorry about that, guys.
It's okay.
Um,
It's all right.
okay. So okay. All right. So I think when we were cut off for a moment, I was talking about this idea of anticipating someone that would come in the future related to King David, etc. This idea wound up being a foundation, not the only foundation, but a foundation for the eventual new ideas regarding an afterlife. It got thrown into those ideas. And as time went on, more theories about my audio is okay. Let's try. Is this better?
Yeah.
Better? Okay. All right.
It's fine.
All right. So there became more ideas about what an afterlife might look like. And some of that has to do with um, an arrival of a Messiah. One idea that emerged was that a Messiah, when he would come, and I say he because I think, let's face it, most of the rabbis of the time assumed it would be a he. I don't want to rule out any possibility, but that was the assumption for most, at the very least. That when a Messiah would come to earth, it would be somebody who would be a descendant of David, and in some people's estimations, would suspend the laws of nature, would help to bring about things that before this would have seemed impossible. So one of these ideas was that a Messiah would help bring about a point in which, at the very least, Jews and all righteous people, for that matter, would be resurrected after death. This idea is found still in our prayer books. The second blessing of the Amidah, of this major, meditative part that we say, one of the big parts of our service, says, Baruch atah Adonai mechayeh hametim. Blessed are you, Adonai, who brings life to the dead. There are those, and I include myself in this, that look at it metaphorically and don't look at it literally. But a lot of people look at it literally. That's what they anticipate. And it impacts some of our practices regarding how we treat bodies after a person has died. We attempt to bury a body with all of its stuff. What I mean by this is that if there is, let's say it is a death in which there is blood spilled, and not necessarily by infamous means, but just there was blood involved. A Hever Kadisha will do what they can to include the blood inside the casket. In other words, all stuff that was part of your body should, as much of it as possible, should be buried in the casket with you. Why? Because the thought is, if we're being resurrected, we're going to need our stuff. Right? That's really what it comes down to, right? And I'm not trying to be, obnoxious about it. I mean, but really, it's we're going to need our stuff. This is why, for a very long time, most Jews were not organ donors, because, well, we need our stuff for when we come back. Now, I am an organ donor.
No,
I am
wait.
very much.
Wait, there was no recognition that people, like, when you're buried, that you sort of like degrade and it all kind of just goes. People didn't realize that yet?
Either that, or they didn't acknowledge it.
Okay. I mean, it just seems a little
Yeah.
contrary to. Okay, never mind.
Yes, I'm an organ donor. I am for organ donation. My feeling is that if I had an opportunity to through donating an organ to save another person's life, and to be able to do that is more important than upholding a theory about what might happen. It's my feeling is, if something as incredible as my dead body being resurrected, should that happen, if I'm missing a couple of kidneys, I think they'd be able to take care of that too. That's how I look at it, right? I'd rather be in a position to save a life if that were feasible. Okay. So, and what would happen after the resurrection? Well, the idea is that we would all go to Israel and live in very tall, high-rise apartments. Apparently, I don't know. I mean, like,
It would be really, really, really crowded. Oh my God. Yeah.
I think micro apartments would be the word of the day. But in all seriousness, I mean, but that is part of the idea. There have been other theories about what would happen in such a day, in such an era. There are those who say that we will, that time of the Messiah, when we are resurrected, will be a time in which every day will be like Shabbat. It will be this eternal bliss of sorts. And other theories include the idea that we will all go back to living in the Garden of Eden. Now, considering that the Garden of Eden only had 2 human residents when it closed, that does seem pretty fantastical, but that's an idea. There are others who will say, sort of alongside that just as Adam and Eve in the garden, at the very least, were told to be vegan, right? They were told to only eat of the plants. We too would go back to being vegan. And there are those who will claim that by being vegan now, or at least vegetarian now, that we are, living part of that idealized existence. I will leave it to you whether you agree with that or not. As a meat eater, I have no comments. So, and of course, there's this idea of peace. Now, there's a lot more I could say about this, but suffice it to say that I want to, go to another idea from this, and this is the idea for Moses Maimonides. Moses Maimonides has a more moderate view of what a time of a Messiah would be. He said, essentially, that yes, there will be peace in Israel led by the descendant of David. But that's about it. Meaning nothing supernatural. No resurrection of the dead. No magic. There are many people who greatly prefer the Maimonidean idea, where they'll say, I don't know if I really like this idea of the resurrection of the dead, but okay, that sounds plausible. Again, we are talking in theory, but these are some theories that have gained a lot of traction and honestly inform a lot of our traditions. What will happen when the Messiah comes? Remember what I said about Elijah? That Elijah kinda, sorta didn't die? Well, Elijah would be the herald, Herald, of the Messiah, meaning when the moment is about to come, Elijah is going to be the one to tell everybody about it. Why? So why do we leave a cup of wine on our Passover Seder tables for Elijah? Because we hope that this is going to be the night that he comes. And we want to be good hosts. We don't want to offer him a glass of wine. That's where it comes from. When at a bris, when a baby boy is circumcised, we say this, we designate a chair, and we say this is the chair of Elijah the prophet, because every person born carries with them the possibility of redemption. In other words, who knows? Maybe the parents of this boy, maybe they've just given birth to the Messiah. When we do Havdalah, the service that concludes Shabbat, the most common song we sing is Eliyahu Hanavi. Right? Imhera v'yamenu yavo eleinu. And it may happen soon in our days that he will come, Im Mashiach ben David, with the Messiah of David. In other words, every week when we Shabbat, we say, hey, maybe this is going to be the week. So these ideas, though again, far from unanimous, not accepted by any kind of real consensus, informs rituals that we do. Will, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, even in Maimonides today, which he seems a whole lot more reasonable as usual in a lot of things, how did it even keep track of descendants of David? I mean, there's a name Davidson, but it's not like Levi's or Cohen's and stuff. So how do they even know? Even then, I don't think now it's possible. But how, could they even do it when he was alive?
I honestly don't know. Fair question, but I honestly don't know what one would have to do to prove it. My sense is that might be one of the supernatural aspects of it, is that, to be able to say, hey, guess what? Can I just show you my lineage here? Maybe that's part of the miracle. I don't know. Okay. So I want to cover two more topics, and thank you for your patience on this, because I know there's a lot in here. A couple more topics. One, you have also, dating back to the earliest rabbis, an idea of Olam Haba, which means the world to come. What is the world to come? Again, it's not entirely clear what it is. But we often say that Judaism is about this world. Judaism is about making this life that we have, the one we know that we have, as meaningful as possible. and that in contrast to other religious traditions, no offense to them, no meaning, no, not to take anything away from them, we are not spending our time making sure to focus on the next life. We are not looking at this life as a mere dress rehearsal for the next one. With that said, even that was not a unanimous opinion. You will find in Pirkei Avot and Ethics of the Fathers and other places statements that talk about that this life is like the lobby before the great hall. Prepare yourself in the lobby so that you can enter the great hall. So it's not like everyone from the beginning said, oh, Judaism is about this life. I tend to think of it in those terms. For me, that is resonance. But again, it isn't for everyone. The other thing I want to note is something that is not necessarily well known, but again, it does inform some of our more familiar Jewish ritual customs. There are strands of belief in Judaism that speak of reincarnation. Now, not the same as, let's say, Hindu reincarnation, which, again, I'm not an authority on that whatsoever. But part of my limited understanding of Hindu reincarnation is that potentially you could be reborn into a person in the highest social class. You could also be reborn as a dung beetle, depending on what you do in this life. Okay. That's not the Jewish sense. The Jewish,
At least according to this strand of Judaism that subscribes to this idea, indicates instead that you would only be reborn as another human life. The idea is this: the body is temporary, the soul is eternal. And the soul, when the body can no longer sustain life, the soul needs a place to go. However, there's a little bit of a break between the end of one human life and the reincarnation into a different one. The idea goes like this: when a person dies, their body is no longer able to sustain life. The soul is judged based on how they did in the previous life. That soul is then cleansed of impurity, of wrongdoing. Now, how long does that take? It depends on how damaged it is. In other words, if you lived a really upstanding life, the idea is that it might not take too long. If you didn't live a great life, it's going to take longer. The maximum, though, is 11 months. What else takes 11 months in Jewish tradition?
Morning.
When we say Kaddish, when we say mourner's Kaddish, for the loss of a parent, and some people choose to do so for other people as well. We say Kaddish for 11 months. And by the way, a lot of people do 11 months minus 1 day because we don't want to give the impression that we assume that our parents lived lives that required the maximum amounts of cleansing. It's a custom. So 11 months would be the longest it would take to be cleansed. There are those who say that that period of time is what we often describe as Gehenna, as a time of, now Gehenna is oftentimes referred to as hell, although again, this idea of, if even if you were to call it hell, it is completely different than the hell of Christianity. It is a difficult moment of the afterlife that has a maximum allowable stay. Nobody stays for more than 11 months, according to this theory. And then the idea is that that soul enters another body, a new life, with there being no memory of any previous lives. There is an idea that I may have mentioned before that every Jewish soul that ever was and ever will be stood together at Mount Sinai at the time of the revelation of the Ten Commandments. There still might be, and I promise you I'm not making this up, there certainly was at one point, maybe it still exists, a Jewish dating site called Saw You at Sinai. Imagining that two Jewish souls would have run across each other like, you look familiar, Mount Sinai, right? I think it's very clever. I think it's very cute. So now, if you want an interesting artistic expression of this cycle, of this idea of Jewish reincarnation, for lack of a better term, I'd like to direct you to a musical artist that I really enjoy. He's not famous. It's possible you may have heard of him, but my guess is that you may not have. His name is Peter Himmelman, Himmelman. Yeah. So a couple of you may have heard him. He's done a bunch of things. He's done like children's records. He's done like musical scores for some television shows. And he's also like, his main work is to be like sort of like I guess like an indie rock artist. He happens to be married, by the way, to the former Maria Dillon, Bob Dylan's daughter. Um, uh, Peter Himmelman is a Baal Teshuva. He is somebody who was born Jewish and did not grow up observant, became observant upon his father's passing, and lives an observant Jewish life. He does he keeps strictly kosher. He keeps Shabbat. He acknowledges that he may have had a bigger career had he been willing to do shows on Shabbat, but he won't. I've met him a couple times. He's a really interesting guy. So he made a concept album sort of like a rock opera years ago. It's called Skin. Skin essentially tells a story of a guy named Ted. When you meet him in the first song, he is the most obnoxious, arrogant person that you could ever imagine. At the end of that song, the implication is that Ted dies in a car accident. The next song is called 11 Months in the Bath of Dirty Spirits, meaning Ted's soul is being cleansed. And it takes the whole 11 months because he's so awful. The next song is called Clean, meaning now the soul is actually pure. In the next song, you hear that he sees essentially the soul watches, and I don't know whether this is part of the theory. The soul watches um, his new life's conception, and the soul sees that he is about to be born of two teenagers. And the next song, in his he's in his new life, and he's got a difficult life. A couple songs later, he discovers love. This new life. He falls in love, and it's bliss and it's wonderful. And you find out that this man, this new life that that Ted's soul had come in, gets married, has a child. Life is good, but then he gets disillusioned, and then he begins to sabotage the happiness that he had built, and then he falls into despair. And then in the final song, it's called "Been Set Free," in which just before this life ends, before this particular life ends, Ted discovers a message. I've believed in money, but all I got was greed. I believed in vengeance, but all I did was bleed. I believed in fame, but fame turned its back on me. If I had only believed in love, I could have been set free. It's one of my favorite albums. And and I found it incredibly fascinating that by the way, I mean, Peter Himmelman's music is very much at many times informed by Jewish ideas, but he's not like, it's not like he's not singing Hava Nagila. Like, it's not like directly. I mean, it's sort of like ideas based on the Jewish teachings that he's adopted sometimes, but it's much more subtle than just simply direct Jewish music per se. Okay, I've nattered on. I've got a few minutes left. I hope you found this interesting. I can take a question or two.
Well, one thing seems kind of contradictory. If you're supposed to be buried if all your parts.
So I guess everything was clear. I'm not. No, it's
I've got
totally okay. Um, Look, this is a it's a big topic, and again, there is no set theory. It is, it took me almost the entire hour to go through all the, to a bunch of different possibilities, and I'm sure I could go through it, more thoroughly than that if we wanted. Um, I will, before we go, recommend a book that gave me, frankly, a lot of the information that I needed for this. Um, it's called The Death of Death. That's the title, The Death of Death. It's by Neil Gilman, Neil, I believe, and then Gilman, Gillman. Neil Gilman was a philosophy professor at Jewish Theological Seminary. He was my professor. He was a very dear man. A very didn't shy away from argument and controversy, but did it with love. He was just I miss him. He's a good guy and a very good writer. So so I would say if you want to look at any book that kind of goes through the progression of Jewish ideas of the afterlife, and he doesn't, have any official conclusions about anything, obviously, but if you want to go through this in greater detail, I I can't recommend that book enough.
So really, after an hour's worth of discussion, the true
Mark,
answer
I can't hear you. Sorry.
okay. Well, I thought I was. Okay, how about now? Yes, no, maybe. Oh, okay.
We can hear you,
Hang on.
Mark.
I can
It's
hear
Rabbi
you.
that can't hear you.
No? Okay,
Okay.
can you hear me now?
I'm having a hard time hearing people. I'm sorry if people are trying to talk. I don't know what
Okay. I
don't know
think
what
maybe.
that is.
Okay. Can you hear me
I
now?
would suggest, since maybe I'm having a little hard time with the hearing, if you would be so kind to email me, if you'd be so kind to, or talk, or we could talk about things next time. I apologize for that. Thank you for standing by with my technical issues today. My phone hopefully has cooled down, and hopefully you've been able to hear everything from me at the very least. I hope that everybody has a good week coming up, and thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Rabbi.